This project has consumed me for the past week or so, and I am so excited to get it out here. It was a lot of work, even more work than I expected. In fact, I had to record the episode twice because the first time Emily joined me, I neglected to record her audio, so it was just me blabbing away at myself in the ether. But the second time I was able to get both of our audios, and I was able to edit it together. And boy, was editing audio a trick. I thought it would be easy. I thought I could just intuitively figure it out, but no, I couldn't. So I recruited one of my followers from TikTok who had offered their help, and he was able to stitch it all together and make it at least listenable, I hope. The only problem now is that my friend who is helping me write the intro ditty is a school teacher, and this is the exact worst time to ask him to help me with a project. So he's willing to do it and he's working on it, but he also has 2 small kids at home, and it's the beginning of a school year, so he's busy. So for now, you get to hear my version of it. This is what I told him when he asked me, "What are you thinking? What do you imagine your ditty should sound like?" I said, it goes a little something like this, but with actual instruments and with an actual musician who can write it. A one, 2, 3, 4. Tim Blackett, baby dabba doo, deep dee bop bop doo, ribby deep dee bop dabba doo, bo deep dee bop bop doo. Tim Blackett, baby deep doo, baby deep bop bop doo. Tim Blackett, baby deep deep, deep deep deep. Tim Blackett, baby deep 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 bop. Tim Blackett, baby deep tip tip tip. Tim Blackett, Tim Blackett and friends. Friends on. Deep 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 doo. I feel a certain serendipity in having Emily Austin join me on this, the inaugural episode of Tim Blackett and Friends. Her book, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, was one of the first book talk books I found. That is, it is one of the first I saw someone talking about on TikTok. I can't for the life of me remember which creator it was, and purposely went to buy it based on that TikTok recommendation. I'm sure you know I loved it. I knew I would based on the brief description of the plot. A clinically anxious lesbian accidentally gets a job at a Catholic church. I grew up in a church, not Catholic, but one that would not be happy about an unapologetically queer person working in the front office, one that very often advocated against the use of medication to help with things like anxiety or depression or various other ailments. I have also suffered with my own depression for almost as long as I can remember, and was very recently diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. So while I am a straight, cisgendered man, and Gilda, the main character, is the near opposite of that, I felt like I found myself almost immediately upon opening these pages. I started telling everyone about it as soon as I was finished, recommending it to friends, giving it to others as gifts, and I included it in my own TikTok video entitled 5 Books for Which I Will Not Accept Criticism, which is still my most viewed video on Book Talk with 715,000 views, and it is, I believe, the video that kickstarted any success I've had on TikTok. Since posting the video, my account has gone from barely over 2,000 followers to over 40,000, and many of those new followers have suggested I start a podcast, which is why we are here now recording the first episode. As often as life feels random and chaotic, and as much as I look to art in order to organize my thoughts and myself in general, it is sometimes nice when life seems to fit into these neat little circular boxes. From reading her book to becoming TikTok friends, mutuals as they say, to having Emily agree to blurb my own forthcoming book, to the TikTok page exploding almost entirely because of a video about her book, to now hosting her as my first guest on my first episode. It feels a little surreal. I feel lucky to have her here. Emily Austin is the author of Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, which was shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award, along with a stunning cast of writers. Lisa Bird Wilson, who will join me in episode 3 in November. Connor Kerr, who was also published by Nightwood Editions, my own publisher. Amy Wall, whose book is my most recent purchase. Brian Thomas Isaac, and of course, Pik Xuan Fong, who won the award. Austin was also longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor and was a finalist for the Ottawa Book Awards. I have just finished Emily's first book, a novella called Oh Honey, which is equally as fascinating, but which an astute Goodreads reviewer calls Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead's scarier, darker, more upsetting ancestor. It is, says the reviewer, awful but good. Emily has 2 books to look forward to in 2024. In January, Interesting Facts About Space, a novel about a paranoid, space-obsessed lesbian who is terrified of bald men, which I have pre-ordered with all of the gusto in the world. And in March, a collection of poems called Gay Girl Prayers, which reclaims Catholic prayers and biblical passages to empower girls, women, and members of the LGBTQIA+ community, which I'm equally excited for. Emily Austin, thank you for joining me on Tim Blackett and Friends.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. I'm so honored to be your first guest. I want to say that I loved your book also, like Tim mentioned in that great intro. I had the lucky chance of being able to read Grandview Drive early, and I'm excited for it to be shared with the world. But yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for doing this again. We had to have a do-over because our first one didn't record properly, so it's a little bit strange redoing everything, but here we are, round 2 of episode 1, and I think it'll make it even better, hopefully.
Yeah, that was our dress rehearsal, so this one's gonna be great.
Exactly. So I just have to start, and I have to ask, how great was that first novel award ceremony with all those authors in one room?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was cool to meet, like you mentioned, some of the names there. It was cool to meet other authors. My book came out sort of like right in the middle of quarantine. And so I didn't really, I didn't meet people, I met everyone on Zoom. Like I didn't meet my literary agent until that event, and everything I was doing felt, I actually generally prefer doing things online because I'm a bit of a hermit, but it was an interesting experience to be able to see people in person, and it was the first time I did that, so it was cool.
So those kinds of things, do you get to talk to each other like the other writers about stuff you're doing, or is it?
At that one we did. That one was so. Not that I've been to a bunch of these things, but at that event, it was sort of still kind of a relatively smaller group of people because it was, I can't remember what time period it was, but it was, generally still the numbers in COVID weren't that bad at that time, but it was pretty fresh that they had been. So it was the other authors, the judges, and there were teenagers there who had been as part of the Amazon Book Award. There was a student award, and that was actually my favorite part of it because I think it's fun to meet. I see myself in teenagers who want to be writers, and I think it's endearing. So it was a relatively smaller group of people. And I forget the original question, but hopefully I answered it in that rambling.
I was just wondering how, for me, those events seem really fun because, I've been to very few of them. In fact, I have not been to any as someone who is publishing something. The only things I've gone to where other writers are there is, conferences that I've paid for to, glean some tidbits of info from those published authors. So, but those are always fun for me because sometimes I get to bump into authors and have real conversations about the writer's life and stuff like that. And
I did actually get to talk to people. It still felt a little I don't know. It's sort of like a strange environment to be in, and it was at the Amazon first award, so there were also Amazon people there, and there's generally among I don't love Amazon personally, and that was sort of funnily the topic of conversation, which was we should the conversation was less about writing and more about how we should take a lot from the bar because Amazon is paying and that kind of thing. I didn't really get a chance to talk too much about writing with anybody, but I got to have nice little conversations with some people. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, in preparation for this interview, partly a bit of research, partly an experiment in procrastination, I watched nearly all of your TikToks. I tried not to click the heart too many times so you didn't get bombarded with Tim Blackett likes your videos, but so that was fun and interesting because we've been friends for a while, so I see your posts, but TikTok doesn't show all of anyone's posts to one person. I don't think it's weird, so I don't know, but I just love how plain old laid back you are in your videos. For me, I need to build up
or amp myself up into this like exaggerated version of myself. Like I don't think I'm acting any differently than I typically do, but I have to like just be a little bit extra or something.
You come across really sincere and candid, honestly. You don't I don't pick up on that at all. So you're hiding it well.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Like if I'm just sitting on the porch with my partner and like, sipping tea or having a smoke, I'm not talking as animated as I do on TikTok.
Oh yeah, you put a little. Yeah, I get that. That's good though, and that's good for a podcast to have a little bit of a radio voice or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I just put on a radio voice for the vids. Yeah. But anyway, you just seem so laid back and maybe even a little bit unenthused sometimes. To me, it feels like you just sort of decided to push record and pushed record. A bit of a spur of the moment situation. You put a lot of thought or energy into them, or?
Oh, definitely not. Not TikTok, and to be honest, it's a little mortifying to think of you watching all my TikToks in one go. I think. I think TikTok I find TikTok really fun. And I know there's, like conversation, but there's something more authentic about TikTok than my experience on like Instagram or whatever in the past. And I really like that. I think like, I've been through a few like social media platform changes, and I think TikTok's one of the better ones. I like Tumblr too. And in the heyday, I was into Tumblr, but TikTok, I think, has a good community on it, and there's some like candidness there that I honestly, to post anything to social media or to the internet in general, or even to write books, I have to kind of in my head just not really care that much. I think the younger version of myself would have really cared that, if I'm recording myself or putting myself on the internet, I probably wouldn't have done it actually. But if I were to, it would have been way more calculated. And now it's easier to just not care. I think maybe that's, I just have this, and I apply that also to when I'm writing. I think like, I don't care. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I kind of brought that up with your videos because the few times when you talk about writing, and especially when you sort of hint at, oh, honey, but even everyone in this room will someday be dead. Sometimes it feels like in your head, writing or being a writer is some kind of accident. Like you just sort of sat down and started writing one day without any big goals or lofty ideas about what being a writer was. So, and part of me understands that or relates to that a whole lot. Like the act of writing is solitary, and for me, a way to, sort of take care of myself. My writing is mine. When I'm sitting down to write, I'm not in anyone else's world. I'm just in my own world, and nothing else matters. And I always say I'd be doing this thing called writing for the rest of my life, whether I got published or not, although publishing was always my goal. But another part of me, the weirdo artist part, somehow believes that everything I write down is important and that everyone on earth should be excited to read it, and publishers should be fighting for my work and all of that.
That's a good attitude.
Yeah, it's like two personas. Like one I'm like cripplingly terrified to show any of my work to anybody on one hand, but on the other hand, I think as soon as I do show it to someone, I'm gonna like burst forth, and everyone's gonna like think Tim is the greatest. But
I think that's probably healthy. You need a little bit of that to be able to do it. Maybe that's helpful in some way.
They're like equally as powerful, but mostly this cripplingly self-conscious person is forefront in my brain until.
Okay.
So I just need a little bit of that guy over here saying, "You're the best." To get myself out
you're
there.
The best guys in there too. Yeah, you need, or we wouldn't get Grandview Drive and everything else that I'm sure we have to look forward to. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that says. Keep taking your crazy pills, Tim. But I am curious about your sort of start as a writer. Was it really as passive as it seems, or has it always been something you've wanted to do? I guess let's hear about your writerly origins.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I was terrible in English. I had a learning disability, and like I don't think I learned to read until grade 4. And even now, I struggle with pronouncing a word I'm not familiar with saying out loud because I don't associate words with their sound. So, anyways, all that to say, when I was a kid, I used to make up really elaborate stories for toys, and I would make up complicated stories in my head. But I would have considered myself someone who's terrible at writing. And I thought that until I got to high school. And when I started high school, I still thought, okay, like English is one of my worst subjects. I went into English class thinking I got to scrape by to pass this. But I had a really nice English teacher. And so depending on where people are listening in the world, in Ontario, it's probably true across Canada, let me know, but there's applied and academic level classes. Is that how it is for you too? Or is that an Ontario thing?
I think like AP English is what you're talking about.
Maybe. Okay. So it's probably, yeah.
I think so, but I went to a really sort of strange private Christian school.
Oh, you went to private. Okay. So you have a different experience.
Totally outside of the public schools.
That's interesting. I'd love to hear about that. But yeah, so I was in like, more trade school track English when I started high school. Like not the English you would need to take in order to be accepted into like a 4-year university. Right. And my English teacher, I had to write a short story. It was one of our first assignments in that class was to write a short story. And so I wrote a short story, and I truly believed it was not good. Like I thought I got to pass this class. So I tried, but I handed it in thinking this is terrible, and I hope that I get a 50%. But then the teacher handed it back, and she gave it an A+ and wrote like really encouraging comments on it. And that teacher also, she submitted it into a contest, and it won for like our municipality, and then it won for our province. And this was so shocking for a 13-year-old me. Like I really genuinely,
that's awesome.
It was quite like, it was so it was the nicest thing. That teacher was really nice for doing that. And then she went out of her way to move me from that level English to the higher level English. So if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to go to university, for example, without jumping through, different hoops and things. So yeah, long story short, I had a really encouraging English teacher. And I don't think I'm completely passive about writing. I like the persona that you painted of me there, though. I think that sounds cool, that I'm not trying, and I'm just like magically being able to write. That sounds cooler. So I don't want to break that image, but I think it's probably not true. Obviously, to get a book published, you have to reach out to people. You have to do all these things, and I did those things. So it certainly wasn't passive. And I definitely wanted to be a writer. I do think I always like, and even now I have like the little people in my head there's one who's saying like that I'm not even like, I almost don't even believe that I have a book published. And it might be partly because of the weird environment when I did have a book published, where everything was virtual and I was able to sort of disassociate from it happening. And everything else was still the same as it always, like COVID was going on, but I was still working like at my normal job, still doing everything, everything was relatively the same, so I could compartmentalize it. And even now, like I'm still, the book's been out for a couple of years now, and I still feel very like if I woke up tomorrow and were told like, oh, that was just a very vivid dream, I'd be like, that makes sense. That adds up. That actually feels more realistic than actually having a book published. I always expect the worst, I think, and that might feed into my attitude about not, I don't know, what you're perceiving on my TikTok, for example, might be a part of me thinking, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so this feeling that you have where it's like sometimes doesn't feel like you even have a book out. Like pretend you're at some thing not to do with anything literary, but you've met a new person. And they're across from you, and they're like, "So, what do you do? Do you tell them about your day job, or you tell them I'm a writer?" Actually,
You know what? I have a hard time telling people I'm a writer. I don't. I think I say my day job. I'd be a lot more likely to say my day job. It would depend on the circumstance a little bit, but yeah, I'd probably say my day job. And actually, at my day job, I didn't want to tell people that I'd written a book, and I thought I could kind of get away with not doing that.
Yeah.
But they found out, and I took a little bit of time. There was like a period of time that I took off from working at my day job, and I worked for a short time at the public library in Ottawa, and that sort of was in the same time period as my book coming out. And during that time period, everyone at my like original job, I think they found it, like it was on like CBC and stuff, and I don't want to say where I work, but it's proliferally, they would read something that came out of the CBC. And so I came back and they're all like, "Your book, I read your book." Like, and I'm like, "Oh God." And now when I see people that I haven't seen in a while, they're like, "Oh, you wrote a book." And I'm like, "Oh God, I don't know how to navigate this conversation."
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I don't know. My book's not even out yet. And I have no idea how many people will even read it or how it's going to do or anything.
I think lots of people are going to read it. It's a great book.
Well,
I hope everyone, I hope it reaches its audience. Yeah.
I hope that's true. But yeah, when I meet new people, I never say I'm a writer. First, I just tell them about my day job.
Right.
It's not even out yet. But in my partner always says, "Why don't you tell people that you wrote a book and stuff?"
You probably should. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Like
I know I have the same problem, but I think, one thing that I did learn from that experience of coming back to my day job and people knowing that I had written a book is that it's kind of nice because most people are so nice, right? Like, for example, like a bunch of these people have bought my book, which is really sweet. And they'll, like in those awkward moments, it depends on your job. You work for the library, right? But yeah, so depending on the environment, like if you're in a meeting or something, there's those like moments before you talk about the subject of the meeting where people try to make small talk. And now small talk is often like, "Do you have another book coming out?" And it's kind of sweet. It's sweet of people to have a chance to know you. I think maybe is probably good.
I guess I just keep kind of waiting for a moment in my brain where it like switches to like, now I believe I'm an author. So when people ask me
that's
what
not
I'm
going to
doing,
happen. I think
I
you
can
just
say
gotta,
I'm an author.
Yeah, I think you just have to do it. That's probably because I feel the same way. I feel honestly, I think this is like a serious problem in me. But even saying, like I struggle to say like I'm a writer. Something in my head is like, oh, like you shouldn't say that. There's something telling me like that's not the right thing to say. So
I had to practice that too, but I've been.
Oh yeah.
It's I don't know how many years ago it was, but in my head, I felt like I couldn't take myself seriously unless I called myself, at least in my own brain, a writer. So I started thinking of myself as a writer.
That's good.
So that I could do better work on the page.
That's good for you.
That's slowly started telling people I'm a writer. So if they say, "What do you do?" and it's obvious they're talking about like, how do you pay your bills? I talk about my day job. But if there's any other room opening, then I'll say, "I'm also a writer. I'm working on a book." Or now I can say, "I have a book coming out." But
I think that's probably the right thing to do. That's the healthy, good thing to do. I support it.
Yeah, maybe when my book starts paying some bills, then I can tell people I'm an author. But
maybe we'll see. Yeah, it's hard to. I still feel that way, and mine's starting to pay a couple bills, but I still feel a little like, I don't know. There's something about it. I think we have to get over it and just do it. That's probably the thing to do.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, I suppose. Everybody in this room will someday be dead seems to me like a big and thoughtful book. But in various reviews that I've seen of it, one review calls it a fun page turner of a novel. That's Sarah Haywood. And it's called A Novel with, quote, a kind-hearted heroine we all need right now. And one review says, turn to any page in this lovely debut and you'll meet a tsunami of joy. And I think this is all like partly true at least, but to me it feels like it's so much more than that. And that it feels to me like, especially that last bit, there's a lot of pages that you could turn to that you would not find a tsunami of joy or any sort of joy. Like the novel is funny.
Aggression. Yeah.
And I laughed out loud a number of times with this book. Like when I recommend it to people, I say it's funny, but it also deals with some pretty dark and heavy things sometimes. Like I couldn't help loving Gilda and hating Giuseppe. But it feels like a book, one of those big books that's not easily pigeonholed into one thing. Like it has a pretty deadly elevator pitch. Atheist lesbian accidentally gets a job at a church. That's basically what it's about. But it's also like darkly humorous, and I don't know. It's in the end hopeful, but there are parts that, they get pretty dark and serious and some pretty heavy issues. So I guess I'm wondering, when you set out to write the book, or anytime you're sitting down to write, are you setting out to make people laugh? Do you want to make people think? You've said you wanted to put more of an effort into planning, and everybody in this room will someday be dead was one of the first that you really planned out before writing, as opposed to just sitting down to write.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in a perfect world, what do you want your readers to get from your writing? Or more generally, do you think about the big ideas of your novels while writing, or are you just writing the story that needs to come out of you?
That's good. I think it's probably something in the middle. With this book, I was, I didn't expect it to be read by anyone. I didn't have like a literary agent or anything when this is the book where I found a literary agent through, and I didn't really, and I have that problem where I expect the worst. So I didn't write it really thinking anyone would read it but me. Like maybe a little bit of hoping that would be cool, but really, really not at all expecting that. So I didn't write it thinking about the reader that much, I guess, which is maybe that's not a good practice, but I was thinking more about what I wanted to write. And originally sitting down, this is something I've started to, I've sort of noticed in myself as I was younger, as I would try to write, and my intention was for it to be like funny or interesting originally. But I think that was actually kind of holding me back a little, because I had a hard time writing anything that was sort of earnest, because, I imagined, I don't know, I didn't have a good attitude about that. I thought, I just want to write something that is funny. And when I first started writing Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, I planned it out I didn't plan it out in detail in terms of having chapters planned or anything like that. It was more that I had that pitch pretty much. I had the idea that I'd write about an atheist lesbian working at a Catholic church. And, the book's sort of divided by the Catholic calendar, and I had that sort of relatively near the beginning planned out. And I had the intention in my mind that I would turn it into a book. Normally, when I wrote before that, I didn't think at all about how it would end or anything like that. I was fully just writing because I like to write, and I was writing for myself. And with Everyone in This Room, I was still writing for myself, I think. But as it progressed, and I started to think, okay, this could actually become a book. I'm actually like structuring this in a relatively more thoughtful way. Then I started to think like, oh, maybe something could happen with this. And I started to write some things that were more earnest. So again, my intention when I started to write it was for it to be funny. But if you write about an atheist lesbian woman working in a Catholic church, it's going to be, you wouldn't really be accurately representing that experience if you didn't acknowledge some of the dark aspects of that. And it made sense for Gilda to be like very anxious and depressed. And obviously there can be some humor in that, but for the most part, there's also like aspects of, true misery and, not happiness when you flip to those pages. So, yeah.
You mentioned structuring it around the Catholic calendar. I don't know anything about the Catholic calendar. How does it differ from just your everyday calendar?
So it's like, I wish I had a book here, but it's like there's Easter is a time period, right? There's 12 tide or whatever they call it, Christmas. There's different ways of like the time of Christmas.
Okay.
There's Lent, right? And then there's also what's it called? Like normal times or something. I can't remember what it's called, but there's ordinary times. That's what it is. Ordinary times, which are the times when there aren't like things like Lent going on. It's how they structure their calendar.
Okay, do you feel like having structured the novel around that, did it disrupt the sort of typical narrative structure that we all use, like beginning and then triggering event and then like adventure and climax and coming down, like beginning, middle, end type stuff? Or does it?
I think the part of why I picked it is because it kind of complemented that to a certain extent. Like the calendar kind of, it follows to an extent, like Lent, for example, and the biblical, and the end of the book, I think it might be Easter or something. I should probably look at my own book before I come on podcast to talk about it, but I was considering what the time period meant in terms of what was going on to a certain extent. And I positioned it so that the end of the story is the same as, I think, the time period of like Jesus coming back or, that kind of,
That type of thing is really interesting for me. It makes me think of how, like, have you read Sheila Heti's Motherhood?
I have, yes. Yeah.
How
that's a great book.
She says she structured that book and its narrative structure around a woman's menstrual cycle. So, there isn't a beginning, middle, and end to that book, but it's
I love that
continuous cycle, which I think is really interesting. And I've not that I want to copy that, but I've just been thinking about this narrative structure that is so sounds so simple. How Aristotelian, I think they call it. The beginning, middle, end type thing.
Right.
And ways I might be able to fiddle around with the structure of a narrative. So, just with all that in my brain, you say to structure it around a Catholic calendar. I think it's really interesting to think about different narrative structures, I guess.
Yeah, I think one thing, I don't know if this is a good writing tip for anyone listening, but I do think it's kind of fun to think of like that example you gave with motherhood and with the Catholic calendar. When you're writing a story, if you can think of like cycles or patterns or processes or whatever in life that are sort of topically related to what you're writing about, it can be a sort of fun writing exercise to think of how you could structure your story in a way that sort of follows that to a certain extent. And even if you don't end up doing it, sometimes that can help. It gives you, it's sort of a creative way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. If there's one thing I love about writing is that you can experiment if you want to, and you don't have to show it to anybody. So if you want to mess around with narrative or the structure or however that works, you can just do that and then throw it in the garbage if that's what you want to do. Anyway, I'm thinking it's time to move on. So maybe tell me about Oh Honey, as much as you can remember. We talked last time about it's hard to remember details about that book, but compared to sitting down to Oh Honey versus Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, was there a big difference in how you planned it or were working on it, or how did Oh Honey come to be in the first place?
Yeah, so Oh Honey is a novella I wrote, and it was definitely less planned than Everyone in This Room, and it was more of it's just like a long, short story, really. And I wrote it in my mid or early 20s, and I'm in my early 30s now, so it's foggy to me. So yeah, I it was the first thing I ever had. Well, the first sort of bigger thing I ever had published.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool experience. It was published by an indie press in the UK, which was cool. And but yeah, it's about a telemarketer for anyone listening who keeps calling the same person over and over. It's hard for me to speak about it thoughtfully because I can't remember. I don't like reading over things I've written. Honestly, it's kind of hard for me to talk about everyone in this room. And I think the only reason I'm able to is because I get asked questions and, lovely folks like you have me on here and talk to me about it. And that never happened for Oh Honey. So it's all just mush in my head. I don't remember any of it.
Okay. So how did you get connected with the press in the UK? Was it just something you found online and submitted there, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was just something I submitted to. They had they had like a novella program or something. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Oh Honey. I just read it like in preparation for this.
Thanks for reading. Yeah, it's nice of you to read.
Yeah.
Do your homework. Yeah, you really do it. You watch my entire. I think you do a little too much. That's a piece of feedback I have for you. I don't think you need to do. I don't think anyone expects you to have watched their entire every TikTok they've posted or read the novellas they wrote in their 20s. It's very kind of you to have done that, but maybe.
No, I think you're probably right. But like, I listened to this podcast called Between the Covers with David Naiman.
Okay.
And like, the man David Naiman, who is the host, is just like so well read and well like spoken, and his questions, the way he like pulls, like, I don't know, he just is so well prepared for a podcast. And I was like, I'm gonna. Is
this a highly produced podcast? Because he might have people behind the scenes.
As far as I know, it's just him. But he like, it's part of Tin House. Like, I don't think it started as that, but now it's officially like the Tin House podcast. So anyone who publishes through them, he will have them on as guests. But he has everyone. He has so many people on. He's had Sheila Heti a number of times, and he had Ursula K. Le Guin before she passed away. And
cool.
But he is so well prepared and does these deep dives and finds these like weird articles written about. So that's the target for you? So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be that guy.
Well, good for you. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of work, but.
Yeah, but it's mostly fun work. But anyway, when I ordered Oh Honey, for some reason, I thought it was a collection of poetry. I didn't even look into what it was. I just knew you had written it, and I thought it was poems.
Very nice of you.
And then it came, and then here it is, a whole novel or novella. So then I was like, oh, even better. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. You can see everyone in this room will someday be dead, like blooming forth from it, sort of. Like in my head, the reviewer that I quoted at the start, he said it's everyone in this room's older or darker ancestor. Like, I think that's totally true, that it's like it has some of the same vibes, though I do think it is like darker, but the way it's a little funny, more apathetic. Dark, yeah. I had fun reading it.
It's a little less. Well, thanks for reading it. That's nice of you to read it. It is a little more. I wrote it. It would have been what I wrote before everyone in this room. It would have been the thing I wrote right before, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Ish. So I can see why that would be the case. But yeah, it's a little more. It's definitely less. It's kind of foggy to me, but I know it doesn't end. Well, sorry to spoil it for anyone. It doesn't end well or anything. Like, there's no. It's not an uplifting read, and I'm in my older age. I'm starting to lean on the side of thinking that is maybe something I would rather put in the world, a little more hopefulness, maybe. But my jaded early mid-20s self did not consider that kind of thing. So, warning for anyone who wants to read that book: you're not going to leave it feeling uplifted.
Yeah. But it's worth your time, I think. But okay, so how have you changed then as a writer in writing this third book, your second like big novel being published with a publisher?
Yeah, so Interesting Facts About Space is my new book. It's I started writing it while I was in the like publishing process of everyone in this room. So for anyone listening, it takes a long time between, there's a whole editing process and a whole behind the scenes production of a book coming out. And so I had, I was working on edits for everyone in this room when I started writing Interesting Facts. And so I really wasn't beyond feeling a little bit more like it's a little more likely that people would read this book. So I hadn't read reviews of everyone in this room as an example of something that didn't impact this book. Like I wasn't writing this book with any sort of feedback beyond what you get while you're publishing. So that didn't majorly affect it. I did have I did have insight from the publishing process. So you work with editors and people while you're working towards your book being published, and that was insightful. Like there were certain things that I noticed as I was working on everyone in this room that I took to this new book. Like like I just thought of the type of feedback they told me. Like they'll tell you things like, "Oh, I want to know more about this relationship," or there's not, like give you certain feedback. And I noticed a trend in the feedback and tried to constructively apply that to this book. So that kind of thing happened. But for the most part, I was relatively in the same. I wasn't. I didn't have the book out in the world, but when I wrote this book, really. So yeah. It wasn't majorly affected by, sometimes I think people ask you your second book, how is it different from writing your first book? And I wasn't in a significantly different position when I wrote this book that's coming out because of the delay in how things are published. So
interesting. Yeah. I have started work on, well, not that the podcast is about me, but yeah.
I want to hear about you. I was going to say, especially with the first episode, we got to hear more about Tim. I feel like the listeners are probably like, I got to know. You want to know the host?
I suppose, but yeah. So yeah, I worked on that first book, the one that's being published for 10 years, almost 10 years. I did a whole lot of things. I earned 2 degrees and had 2 kids and was working full time and being in school and writing this book. So it took me 10 years.
That's a lot, yeah.
Then I was working on getting that published and tightening up the stories and everything like that. And I started writing, well, even during that time, I was working on a novel that's based on my life growing up in a fundamentalist evangelical church and eventually leaving.
Right.
But I kept coming up against all these walls where I couldn't figure out how to tell the story without like offending my family or people that I cared about who are still in church and all that.
Right.
I didn't feel free to write it until I read Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous.
Love that book.
Yeah, because he was writing to his mom in a language she couldn't understand. Mm-hmm. And then I felt like the book was so like free and vulnerable as I read it that in my head I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna. I mean, it was more than this, but I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna pretend my mom won't be or my family won't be able to understand this book.
That's a good, yeah.
And like something that just lifted the wall. And so I wrote that, I started over and I wrote that entire novel in the year 2021, I think.
Wow. Okay.
And I was stuck in COVID and everything.
Right.
And then I just kind of put that to the side and I started another novel. And now I'm like halfway through another novel, but I'm kind of stuck there now that this has been accepted for publication, and then, like you said, all those edits and re-edits and copy edits.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm.
All my mental energy is back to this book that I hadn't really thought about for 5 years.
Yeah.
And so I haven't progressed much further with either of those other 2 things, but yeah. It's a
Well, I'd love to. The first thing you were talking about there, I just want to say, I'd love. That sounds amazing. That's way up my alley. I'd love to read that. And I'm remembering that you just jogged my memory that I think you sent that to me originally, and then sent me another email telling me to. So I think I have it, and I forgot. So
you do have it, because we were like TikTok friends before my book was even accepted. I think somehow.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I did send you that book, but then we switched it out for my short stories. So.
Yeah, but that sounds, and I think we sort of talked about this a little bit in the recording that failed for anyone listening, but I think not considering the people who are going to read your book is probably, like, obviously, you have to consider your own life and the impact on your life, but I think it's no matter what you're writing, regardless of whether it's fiction or like a memoir, I think it's probably good to imagine they're never going to read it, and they might not. I don't know. I don't know your situation, so it also, but they might not.
Well, okay, with that novel, I actually submitted it to a local award here. It's the City of Regina Writing Award.
Oh, cool. Okay, awesome.
But they only want a 10-page snippet, so I had the whole novel already written. But I only sent 10 pages of it.
Okay.
And there were some judges, like, I didn't expect much. Anyway, I placed as a runner-up there. And so
that's a good vote of confidence. That's a sign. That's the kind of thing you're supposed to do.
I was very excited about it and shared it with everybody, but it was at that time, the title of that book has changed now, but back then it was called Look Ma, It's Me.
Yes, I remember now. That's the one I remember. I think I read just the first beginning of it, and I think you told me to read something else. Yeah.
And so then my mom messaged me right away. Am I the mom in your story, or it's some other mom? And I'm like, well, it's a novel based on my life, but it's fictional, so it's not you exactly.
Okay.
And I had to sort of dance around it.
Yeah.
That's why one of the reasons I changed the title. I changed it now to That's Me in the Corner.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I think calls the REM song Losing My Religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Basically what it's about. Anyway, at the City of Regina ceremony, my mom came. She invited my dad's sister, and she invited some friends, and they were very excited. But she said, after the ceremony, we were munching on dainties. And she said, She said, I'm very proud of you, Tim, but I hope you all understand, I don't think I'm going to read this book. And I said, okay, that's fine with me.
Right. Well, good. There you go.
Well, part of me would love for them to read it and to understand more of who I am.
Yeah.
But another part of me is like, okay, that makes me feel a lot better that you're not going to read it. But
and to have to navigate the fallout. But I mean, she could have the option to read if you did want her to. You kind of give the option to her by putting it out there.
Yeah. So, but we'll see if that even turns into a thing. The publisher has it, like Nightwood Editions has it now. And
cool.
President has read
I hope it turns into a thing. I bet it will. It placed in this award. That's a great sign. It's gotta. I bet it will.
I think it's good work, but I mean, I also think I'm the best.
You've got those two monsters in your head, telling you different things. Yeah.
Anyway, did you want to read a bit from Interesting Facts About Space?
Sure. Let me just get my thing open. All right, so I'm just going to read the first few pages of Interesting Facts About Space. So this is a story about a woman who is obsessed with space and listens to a lot of true crime and is convinced that someone is following her. So this is chapter 1. The teenage girl was brutally axed to death by her grandmother. A cashier is scanning my groceries. I have headphones in. My favorite true crime podcast is playing. I read the cashier's lips. She asks, "How are you today?" While the podcast host simultaneously says, "They found the girl's body in the old lady's basement." "I'm good, thanks. How are you?" I put the divider between my groceries and the groceries belonging to the man behind me. I would hate to accidentally purchase his Vienna sausages, or worse, for him to get away with my tampons. The podcast host explains that the teenager's body was found decomposing in a Rubbermaid bin in the grandmother's fruit cellar. Despite the rotting corpse, the grandmother continued to use the fruit cellar. Along with murder, the woman's hobbies included canning. The body was found next to stacks of fruit preserves and pickled beets. Do you need bags? The cashier asks. No, thank you. I brought my own. I gesture to my tote bag. The podcast host jokes, wondering if the grandmother ever considered pickling the dead body. I snort at the grotesque concept while the cashier kindly scans my boxed cake mix and my doll. Sometimes you have to joke about things like pickling murdered teenagers. It's a coping mechanism. It takes the darkness out of the knees. Maybe that's enough.
Thank you very much. I can't wait to read this book. Comes out in January, right?
Yep, comes out in January 30th, I think. I should probably know, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay, my last question before we move on to some kind of goofy segments is about your writing philosophy in general, maybe. I mean, okay. I wrote down maybe talk about self in fiction. And yeah, I know there's a long history of interviewers assuming women fiction writers are incapable of not writing themselves into their fiction. And I hope that's not what I'm doing here. But in both Oh Honey and everybody in this room, your characters are anxious and probably depressed. And interesting facts is about a paranoid woman, so probably some similarities. And I guess on TikTok and various interviews I've seen or heard you being fairly open with the fact that you are too anxious and probably depressed. So I guess the question is just how much, if anything, do you see yourself in your own characters?
Yeah, so the way that, I tend to write first person narrative. So you really have to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're writing. And the way that, and I, obviously when you're writing a book, you want to write about something you have something to say about, right? And that you have some, hopefully insight or knowledge or something, you have something to say. And, I don't have much to say about what it is to be, a straight white man or anything that I'm not, right? I don't know. I don't know what that's like. And so there's certain aspects of the characters in my book that definitely in the Venn diagram overlap with me. Like, I have mental health problems, and I was intentionally trying to write about those. I tend to and I don't know what I'm going to do my whole life. Who knows what I'll do? But I tend to lean into qualities I have that aren't really what, like, for example, Gilda is more of a people pleaser than I am, I would say. But I can imagine what it is like to be that type of person. And, there's maybe like pieces of her that I could really, like, if I saw someone behaving that way, I'd understand why they behave that way, but I wouldn't necessarily behave that way. And similar with my new book, the main character in that book is Enid, and she is more paranoid and fearful than I am, but I am paranoid and fearful. So, I can write about what it would be like to be that type of person, hopefully relatively accurately without being completely that person. But yeah, generally I want to write about things I have some level of experience with, so far at least. And yeah. So.
Write what you know, they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, here is the penultimate segment, a segment I'm calling thoughts/questions that popped into my head while watching Emily Austin's TikTok vids. That's edited since the last time I read it out, but I'm still workshopping that title.
Sounds good.
I just wrote down little thoughts that I had or questions that I had while I was watching all of your videos.
Okay.
Number 1, do you write with the characters marked in Word, like the paragraph?
Right. Yes, I do. I do that. So that's where you can see, like, for anyone that I can see the spaces, and I can see when there's line breaks, and yeah, that's how I write.
And that's not distracting for you? What's the purpose there?
It's not distracting. So my day job is kind of tech adjacent, and that might be part of why, like, sometimes, not lately, but when I first started in the general area I work, I did like web stuff, for example. So I'm used to seeing, it's not upsetting to me to see, line breaks and, where things are like that I actually prefer that because I can see exactly what's going on. Like, Word is notoriously, kind of garbage, and sometimes it does things that you you would spend a really long time troubleshooting if you couldn't tell, oh, it's doing that because there's a weird character that you can't see unless you have this visible. So that's why I do that.
I think I am going to turn it on when I'm doing my editing next, because it looks helpful that way. But I mentioned last time that I do all my writing in a notebook with a pen.
You write by hand, that's a cool
pen. Yeah,
that's a cool way to do it.
It just seems like
it. I tried to do that recently and injured my hand, actually. So
it's hard work. But it's just the way my brain needs to. It slows down enough that I can think about the word instead of just like fluttering off into a meandering mess of.
That's smart. I do that. I definitely do that. So maybe I should try to find a balance.
Yeah, but so when I saw you doing with the character marks on the computer, to me that just looks like so much extra electronics in my face, and maybe I'm old.
No, it's probably I don't think I'm normal for doing that.
But it does look helpful because I do use Word to edit everything, and so when I am editing, and you can't figure out why it's tabbing or indenting an extra inch or whatever, you're like, what the hell? And then you'd be able to see.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely in editing, I would say it's worth doing when you're editing.
I also edit papers for university classes. It's my side gig right now.
Oh, definitely for that. Definitely.
Because sometimes the way they choose to format a paper, I'm like, what is happening? And
the citation stuff especially.
Anyway, Okay, number 2, just a thought. Why is taking an author photograph so hard?
Worst.
I felt so strange taking my own picture, but I think I got some good ones.
Yeah,
I got a really good one. I had a really good photograph, but I was smoking a cigarette in it. And a lot of people said...
that's true. People don't like it. Yeah.
I was smoking a cigarette in it at the same time as I was trying to quit smoking.
No.
people were like,
a little poetic.
Do you really want that to be your photo when you're going to quit? And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. So.
No.
And then I saw number 3, I saw one of your posts said things I could talk forever about, and one of them was Frog and Toad. So
okay.
Wanted to chat about Frog and Toad a bit.
I love Frog and Toad. So Frog and Toad, part of what I love about Frog and Toad is that to a certain audience, they have no idea how queer coded it is.
Yeah.
And so it's a fun, like I have a Frog and Toad tattoo, and it's fun to have like older women kind of be like, oh, I love Frog and Toad. And you can tell it. But then the other people are like lesbians or like gay men being like, oh, Frog and Toad, right? It's a fun sort of secret code. But I love Frog and Toad, like regardless of that aspect. I think Frog and Toad has such a calming, cute vibe to it. Yeah. I love Frog and Toad. And actually, a hard question people ask often is, what's your favorite book? Yeah. And I can never answer it. And my cop-out answer is Frog and Toad.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Good answer.
Yeah.
That's kind of awesome, the way you just described the secret code or whatever, because we were talking before about how I used to borrow the little movies, the Frog and Toad adaptations of the books to movies. When I was a kid, my dad took me to the library and we'd borrow these movies. Yeah. It's really funny for me thinking of either of my parents putting these on for us, me or their grandkids now, and then just being like, haha, they're so gay.
Very gay. I know, that's part of why. And they're gay in such a sweet, they in such a non-sexual way, which is sweet, especially when you consider, not that I'm saying that's necessarily the case for them, but when you consider some religious views of homosexuality, it's so hypersexualized, and they don't at all appreciate the aspects that are represented in Frog and Toad, which is just two sweet little creatures swimming together.
Yeah. I like Frog and Toad too. I like them even more with adding that little bit to them. Number 4, where is The Last Bookstore?
The Last Bookstore is a really cool bookstore in LA. And I actually went on a trip to LA right before, it was for my 30th birthday, which was right before things like lockdown for COVID. Yeah. So if you saw that on TikTok, it's probably because I was making TikToks with the content I had in my phone. And I will all these videos of this cool bookstore I went to. So I think I've actually only been there once, though I have a bad memory. So it's possible it's twice. But
I just remember thinking it looks awesome. It's like on a bucket list now.
It's a cool bookstore. Yeah, it's a really cool bookstore.
Okay, number 5. How often, if ever, do you look at reader reviews?
Yeah, so I don't frequently look at reader reviews, but I don't have, I think we sort of talked about this in the call that failed, but I have something wrong with me where I expect every review to be bad. So I don't have that feeling that I think is perfectly healthy and normal and what people should have, that some authors seem to have, where it's like devastating or really upsetting, or you want to respond to it. Generally, my instinct when I see a bad review is like, with some exceptions, for the most part, is like, that's valid and that's useful. So I have no issue looking at them. And occasionally, like when you have a new book coming out, for example, you want to go update your like Goodreads profile, and they ask you to do, you update. Yeah. So you see stuff, and so I mean, I've probably, and occasionally people will send me like I have someone who likes looking at them, and they'll occasionally send me like funny ones. Like one was like the bell jar but worse, like a 1 star, and one that was like, I don't know. There's a bunch that I think are like, I think have no problem with looking at a review that's bad, and a nice review is so sweet that it's almost all positive when I look at the review, because I'm not super affected by a bad one, and so the good ones I get to read without feeling like, oh, there's a bomb in here. There's no. Okay. So I appreciate it.
I think for me, I'll try to avoid them.
Okay.
I probably won't be able to help myself, and I'll want to go see them.
People can send you them, though. Maybe what you should do is ask maybe someone with your publisher, or like someone who, and ask them to send you the ones that you would want to see. That's what I think some people do, because, it can make, people can be. I've seen some reviews of, thankfully I haven't seen one that really crushed me, but I have seen reviews of some books I really like that I thought, whoa, that is so harsh, and that could potentially be really upsetting. So I could appreciate.
Well, okay, I think for the most part I'd be similar to you in that the negative ones wouldn't really affect me that much. Ones that would, though, are if someone like pinpointed one of my like insecurities around the work or something. Like, I can't think of anything specific, but if like my book is a collection of stories, and in each story I get to a point while writing it where I think this is actually just garbage, I should throw it away.
I think that's a common, I feel that way too. So yeah.
But early on, when I got to that point, I really did just throw it away. But then I got to a point where I was like, that was part of the process. I was finally to a place where I'm like, okay, now it's really settling into a real story. Right. I can figure out what's wrong with it or whatever, just keep going. Like, now it's part of, I don't really feel like I'm into a story until I start feeling like it's shit.
That's a good attitude. Yeah. I'm going to try to think that way.
And then I push through to the end. But if, I don't know, like I'm kind of over this now too, but I used to feel no matter what I wrote, no matter how like dark and gritty I tried to make it, I still felt like my writing was very juvenile. Like,
okay, that's
if I read it after, or I was handing it into a workshop or something, I always thought my peers are going to say this feels like a child wrote it.
No.
Even though nobody ever said that.
No, yeah. It doesn't. It doesn't read that way. The version I saw doesn't read that way at all. Not at all.
But so what I'm saying is, if I were then to go read a review and someone was like, this is stupid. It's supposed to be for adults, but it's like a child wrote it. Why?
That's going to be a problem with your...
If someone else like zeroed in on my deepest insecurity around...
Right.
Like,
you know what? I think...
I do it.
I think I don't think there's a high. As someone who read the particular book that you have coming out, I really, really highly doubt that happening.
Yeah,
but
true.
I think if you're worried about, you never know. Like, you never know how people are going to receive things. If you're worried about it, I would ask someone to filter them for you.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Okay, this is the last section. I think I will end every episode of the podcast with this section. I'm really excited for it. And so many people have already asked me for this section, so I know it's going to be a hit. Anyway, this is Friends Off with Emily Austin. If you tell Emily Austin any of these books are your favorite books, it's Friends Off.
Okay. The first ones are obviously like overtly hateful people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh. So that's one. And also there's a book that I don't want to say the name of, but it was in the Ottawa Library collection, and it caused controversy. It's like a very transphobic book. That kind of book, obviously, Friends Off. A book that I find people, or a writer that I find people always recommend to me when they don't, like if I'm at work, for example, and there's a book on my desk, occasionally, like a coworker I don't really know will be like, "Oh, you read?" And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, a little," and then they'll tell me to read James Patterson, and that's always a red flag to me that we're probably not compatible. And then the last ones would be, I'm pro self-help book. I've read some some therapists have recommended workbooks about anxiety, for example, pro that. But any self-help book that is like focused on hustling, becoming rich, that kind of thing, I'm not interested, and I'm deeply incompatible with anyone who is. And then there's another type that maybe is less incompatible, but still not compatible, which is a type of self-help book that is like selling you snake oil kind of, where it's not really like someone doesn't really have the credentials, for example, to be providing mental health, and they talk a lot about like how to self-actualize, that kind of thing. We're incompatible, and it'll be really hard for me to mask that we are. So those are Friends Off for me.
Thank you for doing that. Okay, how about Friends On? Do you have any books you're just loving these days?
All right, yeah. So Friends On is going to be any book that is any one or multiple of these qualities. So I like it to be weird, sad, funny, gay, or insightful. So, for example, Carmen Maria Machado is a writer I like, who would be sad and gay and insightful and weird. Jen Began is another great writer. Her recent book was called Big Swiss. It's really good. It was weird and funny and gay and lots of things. Miriam Toews wrote All My Puny Sorrows, which is a really funny book. Love that book. Other authors like Roxane Gay. Zoe Woodall is a Canadian writer that I'm a big fan of. It's going to be Friends On if you like bell hooks or Joan Didion. Another Friends On would be, in terms of reading, would be, these aren't books I read, but I find that if I meet someone who's really into like fantasy, it's probably Friends On. There's some exceptions, but like someone who's into like particularly the type of person who likes like, and I don't do this, so it's not about, but if they're into like Ren fairs or like D&D, I would probably Friends On, even though I don't do those things. Those tend to be nice people. I find there's probably exceptions, but Friends On if you're into high fantasy, even though I'm not. So.
Cool. Do you have, what's your most recent book, the book that comes to mind when I say, what's the latest thing you just loved?
Oh man. What is the latest thing? It's hard for me to, I read, The Adult by Bronwyn Fisher relatively recently. It's possible I've loved things since I read that, though, but that comes to mind. So
okay, cool. That one's on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, awesome. That's good. That's a good one.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emily Austin, for coming on and joining us on Tim Blackett and Friends. I had so much fun, even though we had so many technical difficulties and all that. I'm so glad we could do this. I'm so glad you were able to join me on this, the very first episode of Tim Blackett and Friends. Well, that about does it for the first episode of Tim Blackett and Friends.
I want to apologize for the sound quality. I know it's not the greatest, but I'm working on getting some equipment that will fix that. Hopefully, in a few episodes, we'll look back on this together and laugh at the quality. But for now, I hope you enjoyed your time. I want to thank all of my Patreon supporters, Marnie Reiber, Colleen Maloney, Scott Roche, Kristen Guillenard, Jessica Sheffman, and of course, I want to thank my partner in the love of my life, Chantel. I couldn't do any of this without you. Love you. A one, 2, 3, 4. Tim Blackett, baby dabba doo, deep dee bop baba doo, dippy deep dee bop dabba doo, deep dee bop baba doo. Tim Blackett, and friends.